Well, Kenny had a reputation. He loved life and enjoyed partying, and that's fine. He would tell these stories about, them putting, kind of like that story about the men who allegedly escaped from Alcatraz, where they had the paper mache heads and the bodies that they built underneath their blankets on the bed, and the jailers would look in and it looks like the people were in the bed, but they weren't. Well, Snake and his roommates did the same thing.
Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon. Welcome to Beat Everyone. I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com, and I'm here with AL.com Alabama football writer Michael Casagrande, and we're back with another edition of the Golden Age with the man himself, Eli Gold.
Good to see you as always.
Eli, today we're going to talk about a legend.
Who's that?
The Snake.
The Snake. My name's Kenny Stabler.
Ken Stabler, he's obviously an iconic figure in sports. I mean, not just Alabama football. He transcended the game in a lot of ways.
Yes.
And there's nobody on earth who knew that better than you when he was your booth partner calling Alabama football games. So, to put it simply, when I say Kenny Stabler, what's the first thing you think about?
Oh, gosh. The stories. That's probably the first thing he could sit here and tell stories till the cows came home. He never ran out of stories, whether they were collegiately oriented, whether they were pro-oriented, whether it was family stuff. Kenny just loved to tell stories, and he enjoyed life. He enjoyed life, and that was the thing. He taught me so much about football, because obviously the guy won a Super Bowl championship with the Raiders and so on. And I remember when John Madden said if he had one drive that he needed to have with a quarterback in control, he said that quarterback would be Kenny Stabler. Well, you get that kind of a recommendation from John Madden. He was special. But Snake was he was just very, very interesting. Never, ever, ever, ever came on the air impaired. What he did Monday through, or Sunday through the following weekend, I can't say. But he was never impaired on the air, was always prepared. But boy, oh boy, did he have stories so we could sit here and talk all night.
You obviously worked with him for a long time, but how do you remember Stabler the player? What were your memories of him as a fan, maybe before you got to know him?
Well, I was a season ticket holder for the New York Jets growing up, the New York Titans first, and who then became the New York Jets. And we hated two people in the American Football League. Two guys we booed mercilessly. One was Kenny Stabler. He'd come in with the Raiders and he'd always beat the Jets. The other was the coach of both the Denver Broncos and the Boston Patriots, as they were known. His name was Lou Saban. And it was interesting how, I got to work with Nick Saban and obviously with Kenny Stabler. But, Kenny was one of those guys that you hated but wished you had him on your team. He's one of those. You knew he was good. You respected him. And that's why you disliked him, I guess, as a fan.
Did you ever tell him that after?
Oh, yeah. So we talked about that all the time. And then he started regaling me about trips to New York and stories and what have you. And he didn't take him long to get going with stories. But, yeah, Snake was... he was respected to the degree that all of us at Shea Stadium and before that the Polo Grounds, we hated him.
And so you got to work with him. I mean, you grew up going to see these games, and as a fan, hating Ken Stabler, when you find out, I'm going to work with this guy, I'm going to share a booth with this guy, we're going to be partners, that must have been a pretty crazy feeling.
I was thrilled. I mean, I knew how good he was. I had seen him on CBS. He had worked with Greg Gumbel on CBS and different events. so I knew he was good. And, I'm not so foolish as to think that I'm a football guru. I'm not. I know how valuable a qualified color man can be. And what Snake did so well is he was able to analyze a play, and I hate to use the term dumb it down, but that's what he did. He would analyze a play in a way that we could all understand it. And he could do it in 12 or 13 seconds, because on radio, that's the only time you've got, because you got to get out to let the play-by-play guy set up the next play, who's lined up where, so on and so forth. So Kenny was good. He knew what he was talking about. He could explain it, and he could explain it quickly. And that's what made him so very, very good.
Well, and you talked about not sure what he was doing, like when he wasn't in the booth, you know what I mean, in terms of living his life, having a good time.
Sure.
How would you describe his personality, his charm, his reputation?
He loved people. He loved people. We talked about me not being bothered by folks coming up asking for pictures and autographs. Exactly the same with Kenny. I think I mentioned on a previous episode of ours, you'd get off the airplane at an airport, should be a 8-minute walk to baggage claim. It would take him 45 minutes, because every 2 steps, can I get your autograph? Can I get a picture? Aren't you Kenny Stabler? I lived in Oakland. Remember whatever it was. He just enjoyed people. He loved people. And that's what made him so good at what he did, and obviously knew football inside out and backwards.
Did you ever have to take pictures with fans with him?
Oh, sure. I was like the staff photographer. Yeah.
He goes, "Hey, Eli, you mind taking a picture here?"
Sure, I'd be glad to, Snake. And we'd, do that. And yeah, he was, but he would never turn down a request, and especially with the kids. Man, he was so good with kids. Youngsters would come up, or with their parents. Excuse me, and Kenny would just be like a grandfather. Well, it's nice to meet you. Pleasure meeting you. How you doing? He was just wonderful.
How did you perfect this impression?
Well, I don't know if I perfected it. It's probably not anywhere close, but having worked with him for 10 years, it kind of sticks with you.
You ever do it for him?
I don't think so. No, I don't believe so.
How do you think he'd feel about it?
He'd laugh and then shake his head or something like that.
You seem to kind of light up when you talk about Ken Stabler, and
Yeah.
when we mention him. It seems like y'all had a special relationship.
We did.
A special partnership. What was it about, I guess, the bond, the chemistry that you guys had in the booth together?
He was just so good. And I always told him, I said, Snake, you are the star of this show. You're the star of this show, man. Yeah, I may do the play-by-play, but you're Kenny Stabler, man. You're the guy. And he appreciated that. And I gave him all the time in the world that he needed to explain something. If things got drawn out and we were having trouble fitting everything in, he understood, and I would tell him, hey, let's shorten something up or whatever it is. But Kenny was just so good. And then we knew a lot of the same people because, he worked at CBS. I worked at CBS. I knew a lot of the same folks he did. So that, tied us together. And, I was there when he played in New York. Even though he was with Oakland, he'd come in. He could relate to me on that. So we just hit it off. We just got along so very well. But I think he could probably do that with anybody. I really do.
Would it be fair to say he got more runway as the color guy than maybe some of the other people who came before or after?
Well, no. I told the same thing to Phil Savage, to John Parker, to anybody that I worked with. You guys are the star. I told that to a coach just a couple of weeks ago doing volleyball. I said, look, I can describe darn near anything, and I know who the players are, and I've talked to the coaches, but you've won titles as a coach. I said, I'm not going to start analyzing plays when I've got a championship-winning coach sitting next to me. That's your deal, and you're the star of this show. And I say that to all of my color men, and I mean it sincerely. You know, as I've said before, what right did I have to analyze a play when I got a Super Bowl winning quarterback sitting by my side? So, no, he was great to work with, and I gave Kenny as much leeway as he needed, the same as I did with Phil or John Parker or Tyler.
It seems like it was just, you probably felt cooler knowing Kenny Stabler, sharing a booth with him,
Yeah.
like walking around an airport with him. He just had that aura, right?
Yeah, it's like walking with Paul McCartney or
Right.
somebody like
So
that.
he did have kind of a rock star
He did.
vibe.
He did.
Yeah.
And he knew it, but he kept it to himself sometimes, you know. But, you know, when people would always come up, I mean, literally, he couldn't go 3 steps without somebody coming up to him. But he was still a regular guy, you know. He was still a regular guy, but, you know, he was also, somebody once said to me, what's his job? What is Kenny Stabler's job? And I said, his job is being Kenny Stabler. That's what he does for a living after his football playing days. I said, his job is to be the Snake. And he did that. He would appear at all of these golf tournaments and parties and this and that. He was just, he was a personality. And but somebody who earned the right to be a personality, not just some good-looking somebody who was a personality because they had money. Kenny had earned the right to be a personality.
What was the funniest moment you maybe have with him, thing that he's told, or
Oh, God.
or
I remember him telling stories about being on the road trips and, talking about, obviously, he called himself the curfew coach. You know, he didn't have a whole heck of a lot of honor for the curfews, but he would tell these stories about them putting, kind of like that story about the men who allegedly escaped from Alcatraz, where they had the paper mache heads and the bodies that they built underneath their blankets on the bed, and the jailers would look in and it looks like the people were in the bed, but they weren't. Well, Snake and his roommates did the same thing without the paper mache heads, but they put up the blankets and the pillows and made it look like they were in their beds. And and unfortunately the coach walked in to check on them, and he flicked on the switch, and they had put a lamp. They had taken a lamp off the end table and put it under the blankets to make it look like there was a body in there. And I won't mention his roommate, but the roommate, roommate forgot to unplug the lamp. So when the coach came in to do a bed check, he flicked the wall switch on, and the bed lit up. And Snake said, "That stupid son of a beep." It was just. But some of the stories were just classic. Talking about the sun hitting him in the face when he walked out of a bar, but he didn't say it that way. He said, "Then that thing struck me in the face." I said, "What thing?" He goes, "The sun." And we talked, and that was game day in New York against the Jets.
and he still beat you guys.
And he
didn't
still won, yes, handily. So he had tons of stories. But we'd say we were somewhere and I said, "Oh, look, there's Leroy Jordan." Happened to be a Bama guy, but Leroy was arguably one of the greatest linebackers ever in the National Football League when he played for the Cowboys. And Snake would say, "I've been underneath him." Just everything you said, Snake had a response for it.
So he was quick. He was quick.
He was very quick, yeah.
And he's got one of the coolest nicknames in the history of sports,
Yes.
right? And that's how you refer to him. You don't call him Ken or Kenny. You say Snake.
Yeah, it's just, everybody knows him as such.
Yeah.
When we first would sign on a given day, I'd say Kenny Stabler. You got to identify who everybody is, but then it was Snake the rest of the way. But, everybody knew that Kenny and I were a team, even outside of our geographic region. Bama was playing so well, and everybody knew that Eli and Kenny were doing the broadcasts. So when I'd say Snake, it was not which snake is he talking about? How many? There aren't a lot of snakes. There was Don the Snake Prudhomme, the great drag racer, but that wouldn't have been confused with being in a football game. So it wasn't like you really had to identify which snake you were talking about.
Let's take a break. We're talking Ken Stabler with the legendary Eli Gold, his old partner in the booth. This is Beat Everyone. Stick around. We're back here on Beat Everyone with Michael Casagrande. I'm Ben Flanagan. We're sitting here with Eli Gold, and we're talking about his former broadcasting partner, Ken Stabler, a legend in Alabama and just sports in general.
Sure.
And Eli, I wanted to ask you a question. I want to follow up with something that you said earlier, where you said you made a point to stress that Ken Stabler never showed up to work impaired, right? Why was it important to you to stress that, to really emphasize that?
Well, Kenny had a reputation. He loved life and enjoyed partying, and that's fine. It had been reported in the media that Kenny had been arrested a number of times, with DUIs or what have you. That's part of his history. But I think it was important to point out that he was as sober as a judge whenever we were on the air. After the game, he might have had a dozen beers. I don't know. But when we went on the air, he was ready to go on the air and had done his preparation, had his notes. He had done his preparation. So I think that was important because his reputation precedes him or preceded him. And, people might always wonder, did Kenny ever show up drunk or what have you? And not to my knowledge. I never noticed that. He was, very, very straight when he was there. And he'd walk in with a different woman sometimes. Kenny liked the pretty ladies. And, he had a girlfriend. And then he'd walk into the booth with a different woman on his arm. And after a while, I'd lean over to him after the area had cleaned out. I said, say, Snake? I said, who's that? And she wasn't difficult on the eyes, trust me. And I said, Snake, who's that? He goes, well, you got to use all your personnel in this business. That was just, he always had a way to explain things away. He loved life. But that thing about drinking and what have you, I always thought it was important to point out he was never impaired while on the air with us.
Did people ask you that? Or was that something you would get?
I've gotten a couple of questions about that over the years. Not a lot, but I'd go to speak at different dinners and alumni meetings and what have you. And yeah, the question would come up, but not often.
Partiers like to party with their friends, right? And I just wonder, once the game is over, did you ever hang with
Nope.
Kenny Stabler afterwards?
I never did. Number one, I'm not a drinker.
Right.
And I'm just not, that's not my lifestyle. I'm not one who likes to hang around bars. That's just me. I'm not judging anybody. It's just me. I don't like to do that. No, I would see Snake on Saturdays. Now, occasionally we'd cross paths at practice. If I was going on a Tuesday and he happened to be up in the Tuscaloosa area, he lived in Mobile, but if he happened to be up in the Tuscaloosa area, he'd always go to practice, and I'd see him, but that was rare. It was usually, I'd see him every Saturday, and then I wouldn't see him until the start of the next football season, unless we were asked to appear at a golf tournament and something like that, what have you, drive the beer cart or whatever it might be. But no, we didn't hang much. But when we would talk more than see each other. We would talk on the phone more so than when we saw, more than seeing him.
What was it about his style? I mean, what made him different from the other color guys you worked with?
The fact that he had done so much. And he was just good at the color man's job. Like I said, to be able to see things, to spit it out, the analysis, and do it in 12 seconds, that's not easy to do. The guys who are good, now again, when you're on television, you have more time because, you know, you see the huddle breaking when they had huddles and they would go to the, you could see guys lining up, two over there and this one here and this and this. So you could talk over the picture, so you had more time. But on radio, you really had about 12 seconds before you had to yield it back to the play-by-play guy to set up the next play. And the play-by-play guy says, you got this guy, these guys over here, these guys here. So he was able to get it done, explain it clearly and well, and do it in that condensed amount of time. And that was just one of the many things that made Kenny as good as he was.
Well, and I believe he got to call the first Saban season in 2007, if I'm not mistaken. Do you recall there being any sort of like dialogue between the two of you about Saban coming in and maybe, you know, any sort of like new energy and excitement around the program? Did he and Saban have a relationship that
He and the coach had a wonderful relationship. Coach Saban, and even though he and I got along really well, Coach Saban and I, he really respected former players. That was the pinnacle, man. If you played in the league, let alone college, but if you played in the NFL, I mean, you were on that list. And then if you played in the NFL and you played in Super Bowls and you won then you were at the top of the list. So yes, they had a wonderful relationship. They sure did.
Yeah, I think it's funny that you say that in terms of like Saban and who he respects, not to digress, because the happiest you'll see Nick Saban on a game day, or at least while he was coaching, was pregame when he's talking to the other coach. He just always seems to have respect for people who know football.
Exactly,
right? Yeah.
Exactly. That's, and I understand that.
And Kenny falls into that category, obviously.
Kenny obviously knew everything about football. And yes, they had a wonderful relationship, and Coach Saban is like that. He does respect a lot of people. You know, he respects me, but I also realize that, you know, there are different levels. And you know, I never will be able to get into that level of that top group where you played and succeeded in the National Football League.
Well, yeah, you don't want to come to my level because I'm way below even what you are, Eli. So you come down to the basement, you come hang out with us.
Well, Kenny left before the 2008 season. How did your work life, your professional life change? Because, I mean, he was your partner. Y'all had amazing chemistry.
Yeah.
And it suddenly changed. And
It changed.
You had to move on. But I'm sure you missed him, like, once he was
I did.
gone.
I missed him a lot. I missed him a good bit. But I had no say in the matter. You know, he was released after a DUI arrest down in South Alabama, and the university felt they had to go in a different direction. I've heard that statement before. And, you know, Kenny just had to, you know, he was always on my mind. And we'd see him on occasion, but not often. But what changed for me is that next season, we hadn't had, you know, we hadn't had an heir apparent. Nobody expected Kenny to be leaving or to be let go. So I ended up having 14 different color men.
That's unbelievable.
That next season. I had a different guy every game, except for Tyler, who I think did 2 games, if I'm not mistaken. And it was tough. Every week I'd pick up the phone on a Tuesday or a Wednesday and talk to the new color man and go over how we do things and what you're going to be expected to do and what we have. You know, you have to vote on a certain player of the game or this, whatever it is, you know, so make notes of this as you go and so on. It was different. It was different. And, but, you know, that whole deal was out of my hands. You know, I was told that Kenny wasn't coming back. And then I was given the list of the 14 or 13 guys who were going to try out the next year, and then as it turned out, one of my NFL games that season, I did the Browns and somebody, I've forgotten who, in Cleveland, and the Browns general manager was Phil Savage, who I knew Phil from when he was on the Bill Curry staff way back when I first started. But I walked into the press box, and Phil and I sat down and had lunch together, and it was just a kind of, hey, how you been? Long time no see, this kind of thing, you know. And then we started talking about Phil and Romeo Crennel, who was the head coach, and both men were on the hot seat, and so on and so forth. And as it turns out, both men got released in Cleveland, and Phil had worked with Nick Saban, and they knew each other well. And you know, the decision was made to bring Phil in, and he came in for the A-Day game in his first season. He came in time for the A-Day game, and he was so prepared, it was scary. It was scary. He knew everything about everybody. He had been, well, of course, he had been an NFL general manager. He knew the personnel in college, especially the higher ranked players, of which Alabama had a ton. So he knew that. He was so good on the air that it was in the first quarter that we talked about, I guess in a previous episode, Tom Stipe, our producer and engineer, Tom got in my ear just talking to me, and he said, I believe we've found our boy, is what he said to me. And I said, and I just kind of nodded back. But yeah, it was clearly he was the best guy for the job, and then he was my color man for the next 10 years.
Well, yeah, so you pretty much, you had long stretches where you had long time.
I did. I worked with Doug Layton for a lot of years, and then Snake for 10, and then Phil Savage for 10, and then John Parker Wilson, and then Tyler Watts. I guess JP was with you for 6 years, and Tyler Watts for a couple, 3. So yeah, it's been scant little turnover. And of course, in the play-by-play seat, you know, there had been no turnover since 1989. So this is one of those jobs that you hang on to if you can.
And I'm not going to ask you to tell me who your favorite was.
As far as color man?
Yeah, but if you want to, you can.
No, they were all good
Yeah.
in different ways. It was, you know, I had to know how to approach them and the best way to do it. But Phil looked at things from a personnel standpoint.
Right.
Snake looked at things from a quarterbacking standpoint. John Parker was more play analysis. And the same thing with Tyler. But yeah, it's you changed I had to change my questions and the way I would lead into them just a little bit based on their strengths.
That takes time, I'm sure,
Yeah,
to figure out
yeah,
who.
but it wasn't bad. They both knew their stuff. Phil and Snake both knew their stuff. They just looked at it differently.
Well, after a battle with an illness in July 2015, Kenny passed away.
Yes.
What do you remember about his passing? Where were you when you heard the news, and how did you reflect on that?
I was on the road somewhere. I don't remember where. It's another one of those nondescript hotel rooms in some city. And my phone rang, my cell phone, and it was Cecil Hurt, the now deceased sports editor of the Tuscaloosa News. And he asked me, he said, hey, have you heard anything about Snake dying? I said, no, haven't heard a word. He said, well, I've heard that from 2 people now. He said, I'm thinking it might be accurate. I said, I don't know. I said, I'll give a phone call or 2. And I called Kenny's cell phone number, and there was no answer. It rang and went to voicemail. And Cecil called me back probably no more than 10 minutes later, because Cecil was as well connected as any human being when it had to do with anything Alabama. And he called me back and said, yeah, it's true. He passed away about a little while ago. So that's how I learned from Cecil in a hotel room. And it was sad. It was, you know, I knew Kenny was ill. And Kenny was like a lot of big time super athletes. He thought he would never get sick. And he also thought that if he did get sick, it would take care of itself. He'd get over it, whatever it was. He'd get over it. You know, these guys were like supermen. Kenny didn't do the doctor. He didn't do doctors. Well, unfortunately, when he got to be very, very, very sick, it was too late for anything, as it turned out. The colon cancer and all had eaten him up, and there wasn't much that could be done. So, you know, I was sad, and then for a few minutes I was pissed off at him. But to this day, if I'm speaking somewhere, I'll get on my soapbox and I'll use Kenny's story as an example, particularly to the gentlemen in the crowd. You know, everybody's got to take care of themselves. But, you know, I've gotten colonoscopies from when I was in my 40s and 50s and 60s, and just had one now recently as I turned 70. I always tell the guys, particularly, take care of yourselves. Don't let it sit. Don't let it simmer. Take care of yourselves. It's not that bad of a deal. Yeah, the prep is not fun, but it's all right. It's worth it so you can be around with your family for the next 10, 15, 20, 30 years, whatever it might be. And I use Kenny as an example. Said, don't do like Snake. Get out there, go to the doctor, take good care of yourselves. And so out of that terrible experience, hopefully something good can come, as I and others I know have used Kenny as an example of what not to do when you're sick.
Well, Eli, to close here, it seems like Kenny Stabler brought a lot of joy to your life.
Yes.
Like in terms of your partnership and your
Yes.
relationship.
And he was great. He and my wife would laugh, and our daughter. I mean, he was just a nice guy. He really was.
I was going to say, like, what is it you would want people to remember about Ken Stabler?
How much he loved the University of Alabama. That's the big thing. There was nothing that went on at the university that he wasn't in some way engaged in. And a lot of it never came out publicly, but he just loved the university. He had a strong spot in his heart for Tuscaloosa, for Bama fans. He loved football. He was a great, great guy. He really was. But boy, did he love the University of Alabama.
Well, and what would he say about you doing a podcast?
He said, I wouldn't believe it if I ever told me that. I can't believe it. He said, you're sitting here talking to people, you can't see them, you don't know them. He said, nah, that'll never work.
A great promo. Beat everyone.
He's probably right, too, you know? Eli, thanks for sharing all that.
My pleasure. You allowed me to think back on some very happy times with Kenny.
Yeah, he's a legend, no doubt.
Yep.
Well, if you have a question for Eli, please leave us a voicemail at 205-523-4809. Subscribe to Beat Everyone wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, everywhere. And for Michael Casagrande, for Eli Gold, I'm Ben Flanagan. Thank you so much.
Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon.